Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney, and this week's guest, I have to say, I have admired her work from afar, and I'm really, really delighted that she agreed to come on the podcast. So first of all, I'll say welcome, Laura.
Oh, thank you for having me on your podcast.
So this is Laura Overton, and I know her from some work she has now told me was a labour of love for 15 years, for many, many years, from the work that she did in Towards Maturity. And if you haven't seen the work she did in terms of the research she did, I recommend that you dig it out and go and take a look at it, because there was some really useful research that for me definitely resonated as someone who'd been in the learning and development world. But over and above that, that's just part of what Laura does. She's an award-winning learning and development industry analyst, speaker, and she is co-founder of a project called Emerging Stronger, which is a global project, and she's been filling me in on. And I think perhaps you can share a little bit about that at the end and direct to people to it if they're interested in it. Laura, is there anything else you'd like to just position in terms of who you are and what you do from your point of view, Laura?
But without making me sound too old.
I'm so with you on that one. Yeah. Highly experienced and all that. Experience, that's what it is.
Absolutely. That's the word. Now, I've been in the industry since the mid-80s and predominantly been in the ed tech environment. So I've kind of lived and grown with the changing world of automated learning and technology. And I'm just so fascinated by the impact that change is having on us and the role that we can have as people professionals to bring out the best. But I guess my key thing is that how do we bring out the best in ourselves in order to bring out the best in other people as well? So I think that's probably been the red thread throughout all of the different aspects of my career.
And I think your LinkedIn sort of handle, if you like, continually curious about learning, innovation and business impact, that's a really great way of summing it, isn't it? Being curious, if you're in a learning role, if you want to grow, continue to grow, doesn't matter how long we've been in any organization or an industry, being continually curious about where it's taking us. And that's, again, how, obviously, I was aware of you, and then you really piqued my interest in terms of a blog that you put out recently about data and that aspect of, we know that we're increasingly being told as people professionals to be more data driven, right, in terms of those sort of things. I mean, the CIPD would talk about being evidence-based, and often that links to data. And my sense is that is something that people are sometimes a bit fearful of. So I thought that's something for us to explore in this, and how can we maybe demystify it a little bit. But perhaps though the starting point might be when someone says that we're being data driven or we must go to the data, what do you think they mean by that, or what should we mean by that in a people profession way?
A lot of questions in there. What should we mean? What could we mean? What do we mean? Probably are all answered very, very differently. I think that there is a real passion around, we've got to get hold of the data because of the emphasis on technology, on AI, on big data, on our dashboards, and I think, Lucinda, and I think this is what really concerns me, is often we're looking at data, being data driven is almost like, how do we prove ourselves as people professionals? How do we actually show that we're doing something, and you can prove that we're doing something? Because to date, without data, our work hasn't necessarily been as tangible as, say, our counterparts in other parts of the business. So I think we've kind of grasped data thinking, can we be seen? Can we be seen? And I don't necessarily think that's a good definition and a good starting point for being data driven. And I think just as you were asking me that question, I was reflecting, I think I've always been data driven, she said, in air quotes around data driven, because if I'm honest, I was a young female in a technology driven male environment for the early part of my career. I had ideas, I had background, I had an academic background, understood about learning, but I didn't have a voice. And it was very difficult to be heard in a very traditional environment. So I think I became data driven because I realized that when I had evidence behind my voice, I got heard. And it was just happened to be something that I noticed early in my career. The more I could quote other people's research and work in making my point, the more I was heard in my industry. So I think for me personally, that's what data driven has meant for me. Data evidence that comes from beyond just my opinion or my personal experience.
That's so interesting. Well, it's so interesting you say that, right? Because we both feel like we've been around the block a bit. So I was a young professional female in a technology male-driven environment, and I felt that I had to have, well, I say data evidence, and it was slightly different. So I probably had to, I see it as things like numbers, so metrics, so things like a balanced scorecard. So both are correct. So if you both could be seen as data. So we're saying, what do we mean by data? So it could be research evidence, and this is what was done in this organization that's comparable. So that's sort of third-party evidence. Ours was maybe, what evidence have we got in our engagement survey metrics that shows that people are unhappy, or what data have we got in terms of attrition or retention, which means that I need you, Mr. FD, to take me seriously and invest in our training, because I'm trying to prove to you that we've got a problem, and I can also prove that we've got a return on investment if you let me do X, Y, Z. So yeah. So it was that kind of thing. And funny enough, it was your towards maturity piece that I used when I did a session on how to build a balanced scorecard. It was another ways in which you can get that kind of data. So isn't that interesting? We both used it almost to give us credibility.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we're becoming too data driven, and with a different emphasis on the word there, that we're looking at the problem or the issue or the questions that we're bringing to our profession, and we're saying, I've got to use the data. Where's the data? We're actually, it messes up the balance a little bit when we become too data driven, in the sense that everything is about the numbers and the analytics and the fear of the numbers and the fact that I can't analyze it. And we can become paralyzed within that environment if we're not used to it. So for me, being data driven actually is about being curious and being willing to look at alternative sources of insight and information in order to come up with a proof point, if you like. Data is all about evidence, and evidence is about proving. And it's not just about proving our value, but it might be about improving. It might even be about disproving something. I've had a conversation earlier today about how we're challenged as, how do we allow ourselves to be challenged by data as professionals as well? Are we willing to question ourselves when we're confronted with different sources of evidence that make us say, well, maybe the way I did it in the past might not be necessarily the best way for the future. So the proof points to ourselves and to other people are really, really important when it comes down to data. And notice we're not talking about any sums here. We're not talking about any maths or technology at this point in time, but we're talking about the power that evidence can give us as people professionals to have a voice and to be flexible and to change and to adapt.
So it's kind of about, there's something about, when we're saying about it, is seeing themes. and also things of the evidence indicates, but it's not absolute when it comes to people stuff, is it either, though? Because it is kind of things that suggest something, and it's almost the best evidence that's available to you there. And we have to be open-minded and also not threatened maybe by the fact that it might change. What we did last year, it might have been the best thing we could do with the evidence, but actually now we think it's a better thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right there. I did a study on L&D's relationship with data. I think it was probably 3 or 4 years ago. And it was just really interesting because we said, okay, well, what do you want data to do for you? And I was listening to, I talk about L&D, but actually it's the same for any of the people professionals. And when we asked that question, said, okay, I want it to help me to make a business case. I want it to help me to make smarter recommendations, be able to spot what's needed. I want it to be able to help me to improve engagement. I want it to help me to prove myself, and these are all real things that we have to do all of the time. But when we start to say, okay, well, what do we need to do to be a better people professional to serve our organization? It's those questions that allow us to say, okay, now I can go out and explore. Now I can go out and find out what that data might be that can help me answer those questions in smarter ways, cleverer ways that build on other people's experience, ways that build on the experiences that are beyond HR within our organization to other parts of the business. How do we connect and collaborate together? And data creates the bridges that we need to be able to move forward and to take ground, really.
Absolutely. So what stops us, and why do you think we sometimes don't do that?
Well, I know we were talking about this when you had a read of the article. I was having a little bit of fun, but actually you've articulated it so much better than I did in the article about the kind of traps and what stops us. And I came up with 4 personas that really looked at the kind of challenges that we have in our relationship with data. One was being the data junkie. I guess that's that point about being too data driven. So I can't do anything. I can't move until you show me the data. You're giving me a recommendation, but where's the data? And then we get even more narrow-minded and say, no, but where's the data from my organization and my sector rather than somebody else's sector? We can be very, very focused. There are the data deniers as well. And that when we're still very strong, it's, my instinct, my gut, my experience has got me here so far. And we all know about statistics, there are damn lies in statistics. And look, I've won awards and I never needed a bit of data. There's a danger with that as well, because we're missing out, when the world is changing so rapidly, we're not learning. Yes. We're not hungry to learn, so the data junkie gets paralyzed. The data denier can become too much of an expert, and when being an expert means that they are unable to adapt in a way that is needed in a changing environment.
Yeah, and when the world is moving faster than your experience, you can't always say your experience might have been relevant then, but it might not be relevant now.
Exactly. Or environments have changed, and it's not just with HR people and people professionals, it's right across the board. There's another one as well. The third one for me was I called them the data dabblers. Say that I'm really big on data, but actually it's basically the data that you've got on your HR dashboard, that you've got your system in place and it's giving you your dashboard about what you're doing. It's kind of quite myopic in the sense of we're just managing our own dashboard and we're not seeing the bigger picture around us, and always lots of excuses about why we can't look at the data in other areas. I can't get hold of the data, I can't connect with them, but I can look at my own. I can look at my completion rates or my hours spent learning, or
it's almost like measuring what you can measure rather than the stuff that makes a difference, isn't it? It's just like something else.
Absolutely. And the one that kind of concerns me a little bit in terms of the traps we fall into around about data is the ones where we put our heads in the sand, the data ostriches. And for me, this is the one that makes me the saddest, because I see it so regularly that when, as people professionals, particularly on the learning side, when you say the word data, you immediately conflate data with the concept of proving return on investment. And when you're trying trying to prove return on investment, has what I've done been successful in this organization? Has it shifted behavior? Has it made a business different? It is so difficult to do that, to be able to isolate it, and so frightening, because what if you can't isolate the fact that you made a difference? And it's almost like you're sticking your head above the parapet, and the idea of data conflated as being a return on investment can make so many just be so nervous of that and literally put our heads in the sand. So I think there's some really significant psychological traps that we have with our relationship with data that can really kind of trip us up, rather than being liberated in the way that you and I were talking about earlier. You know, for us, data actually liberates us.
And gave us confidence and gave us credibility. We were using it as a tool for that. Yes.
Yeah.
You had to have the confidence in the first place to do that, and also push back. One thing that's interesting when you're talking about the sort of the narrow bit, because it's the balance, and I think one of the very early podcasts I did was with Rob Breener.
Yes.
And he
love that guy.
Yeah, well, but he's really likes to shake it up, doesn't he? And all about the evidence. He was actually my professor when I did masters in psychology. He was my professor. It was all remote though, so I hadn't met him until this day. I did this podcast with him, and it's great. He's so good to be challenged by that. And then I said, but if you're an in-house L&D person or HR person and you haven't got the evidence, you're looking at other things, it's like, so what do you do? Because sometimes you've got to be pragmatic as well. And he was like, he hates the word pragmatic. He wasn't having it, but then he's an academic. And I think this is the thing where we do also have to have our confidence to go, this is the best evidence that I have got. And this is, we are looking at the data that is here, and we'll look for more data, but also this is our recommendation. So we've got to be confident enough to bring it all together.
Yeah. And you know what though, Lucinda, I've spent a bit of time talking to Rob as well, and he's got the best analogy. In fact, I asked him to record it for me so I could use it in one of my own talks. But basically, he was talking about going, and you've probably heard this, but he was talking about going for dinner in a foreign country, and you got to make a decision. It's not something you're going to be planning for decades and decades, before you invest, but you're just going out for supper. And he says, you could just walk past the restaurant and see it's really busy, but it might be busy for various different reasons. It's just there's a flood of a party going in or whatever. You could go on to TripAdvisor and explore it there. You could ask the concierge in the hotel, but in a short period of time you could probably gather a number of different data sources, and from that, he probably didn't use the word of make a pragmatic decision, but from that you would make a smarter decision that would work for you.
That's an example of getting the best evidence available to you at the time.
In the moment in time. And, our evidence bases don't have to come from ourselves. It's about being aware of who else has the evidence and just being curious. Not saying, can I have access to your data, but I hear you're analysing this in sales, for example, at the moment. Can you just tell me, what are you finding out? Because I've got a gut sense. I'd really like to test my gut sense with you. Is your data showing anything there that maybe I might be able to help with as a people professional, as an L&D professional? So that to me is our source data. We might just be able to take data analysts in our organization out for coffee. And that is a good source of data. And I think we're in the middle of our Emerging Stronger masterclass at the moment, and one of the lenses that we use for professionals to emerge stronger is the data lens. And one of our participants recently said, it's like these diverse sources of truth. Because every person, every source of data has got a different angle and a different perspective to be able to look through on this lens. And it just makes us more informed when we're making our decisions, to know how to then apply that knowledge.
So really what we're saying though, in terms of demystifying data, is data is all around us. It's whether you chat to the data. I'm thinking that also, so we've been running a training course recently with an organisation, and they had some cultural challenges, and the leaders didn't really understand what the problem was, which is quite classic, because quite often it's the leaders, isn't it, or it's the managers that's the reason, because they're part of the problem. And when you're facilitating the training course, the examples are coming through thick and fast from people. So that's data. When people are saying, well, I won't get recognition, or I don't have time to do all of this, is kind of evidence. You start to build a picture.
Yeah.
Long as you're open-minded and listening. And I suppose there's one thing, maybe a big watch out for us as people professionals, is not to go in with our unconscious bias, of course. So I might think I know the solution, and I go out looking for the fact that the problem is the managers. You've got to be open-minded about what the real evidence is out there. But it comes in all forms. Just even though it's anecdotal, sufficient anecdotes build up a picture of what the culture is and what the challenges are.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that, in fact, even today I was on a call with the Oxford Review that do a lot of reviews of research paper, and there was an absolutely fascinating quote that kind of came through from what they were saying, because they were saying that looking at the whole idea of CPD, and with technical CPD, it's very evidence driven, whether it's medicine or whether it's engineering, it's the science goes into that. And yet what they call the adjunct CPD, that kind of leadership type training, it's how few, the research is saying, how few evidence papers or scientific papers are used in building those types of skills. So we don't really tap into the external scientific literature in our own field, the field of learning science, the field of organizational development or complexity, sort of there are people who translate that type of evidence for us. There are great books that have been written, but we tend not to tap into that type of data and evidence that could completely transform our practice, let alone all the big data and the analytics and the dashboards from in their own organization. But that kind of scientific evidence,
that's interesting, isn't it? Because again, it's one of the conversations I had with Rob Breener, because in actual fact, that's because quite often the evidence that is out there, if you look in terms of that, the stuff that's written about in journals is not necessarily the stuff that's useful to businesses. It's kind of, it often feels quite disconnected. So I get my psychology thing. I don't see it. It's quite clinically oriented, and maybe some of the ODs, it's not necessarily, doesn't feel that useful. And it's maybe then the problem, the risk with that, though, therefore, is that the likes of, I'll pick on Coach, but I won't pick on it, the large engagement body that makes lots of money out of surveys, they've got a vested interest in proving correlation with something, because that helps them sell their product. So there's also something we've got to be quite cautious about, the evidence or the data out there, haven't we, in terms of.
But you know what, though, again, it's about being, sorry Rob, pragmatic.
I'm going to send this episode to Rob.
Bless. It's about being pragmatic, because there are so many different sources of data, and I believe as an industry, it's absolutely critical that we're critical, that we are critical thinkers, that we're aware of where the biases might be, etc., but not to become hypercritical. Because I've also seen
dismissive of it.
That people are dismissive, or they dig in and dig in and dig in. But that was with a group of 500 people, and actually I need 550 for it to be valid in my, it's
not in my industry, but that data doesn't exist in your industry, so that's the best data available now. That's the thing, isn't it?
And so I'll dismiss it all, because then again, that's the kind of that data junkie, you just gotta, everything's got to be perfect, and in the data world it is not perfect. It just is not perfect, and yet there is an illusion that because it's data, because it's numbers, it's black and white. It's not. It's always there in a context. It's always going to be interpreted. It's why having communities working on it together, having multiple sources are important, and coming up with the right thing for your organization. If you're a people professional in a small organization, you're probably surrounded by data, and it's great because you can be part of that. So, okay, what does this mean, and how can we all learn and grow together as a result of what we found out?
I mean,
we're siloed, it's difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. So it strikes me a lot of what we're saying here really though is about, we both would feel reasonably confident to say, well, that's the best data available, to push back if someone's challenging it in that way, or to, if someone's doing something completely intuitively, say, well, what's the evidence that makes us think that? We're kind of saying that maybe because we've been around the block a bit, we've perhaps had experience of doing that. Not everybody, it resonates with me. Lots of people have this sort of, I don't, almost imposter complex. Don't feel they feel confident. People say, I've got to be data driven, and that's why they might be over analytical. It doesn't quite tell me that. I don't have that confidence. I mean, you've been doing some stuff on sort of mindset, haven't you, in terms of the psychological thoughts or mindset that would help us do that. Do you have any tips there or recommendations as to what people could, the way we should think, be open-minded, be curious? What else is there?
Well, in the project I was working on with I'm working on with Michelle Ockers and Shannon Tipton from Australia and America, it's kind of a global initiative that we were looking at initially, how can we as learning professionals emerge stronger as a result of the pandemic. So we did a series of interviews about, right in the heart of middle of 2020 of what can we do, when everything is changing all around us, we're disrupted. And what we really noticed in the patterns of those interviews, because I'm a data person, I'm not necessarily a mathematical person, but I'm a pattern creator. I'm looking for patterns in what I see. And I saw that actually it was less about what people did, but it was how they approached it. It was kind of almost like their kind of inner game. You've been talking about your psychology masters, that behavioral wheel that you use in cognitive behavioral therapy, things like your thinking habits influence your behavior influence your feelings, that cycle of behavior and thinking and feelings. And it was really clear that those professionals that we were talking to had tapped into something around their thinking habits. When they were thinking about their own professional identity, how they saw themselves made a difference. So we identified about 5 thinking habits. One of them was about how we see our own value. And do we see our value as learning professionals, or do we see our value as through the business solutions that we enable as an organization? Within the organization. So that kind of thinking habit of value. You're thinking about habits about how we interact with others. Do we see ourselves as being the expert? I'm the one who is called in to do something. Or do we see ourselves as a primary role as being empathetic explorers in order to uncover what's needed in an organization in order to apply our expertise and our professionalism. So it's this kind of continuums that we talked about quite a lot. And where you are on that continuum also influences your impact and your relationship with data. So if you're on the values continuum and you're thinking, I'm here to deliver value through my learning solutions, you're constantly looking for data to prove your learning solutions have worked. Whereas if you are there saying, actually, I'm here to co-create value with the business by bringing my expertise to the business, you're constantly looking for ways to work with the business and with their data as well as your own in order to do that. If you are seeing yourselves as an expert, you're looking at data to prove you're right. If you see yourselves as an empathetic explorer, you're looking for data to help you uncover the best way to add value. And you don't mind which way it is. Do you see what I mean? So the way we think about ourselves influences our behavior and influences our responses to the world around us. We're just using data as an example here, and I've given you only 2 of the 5 thinking habits, but
that's the trick. I wonder if the others fit in the same way, because what I noticed about what you said there is it's whether you're seeing itself as being about you, about internal, it's all about you, or whether it's external, right? So it's the impact. And actually, if you think it's all about you, then you're potentially threatening your own identity. If the data's wrong, or then you're threatened as being an expert, and that's going to make you feel insecure and anxious. Whereas if you think that actually I'm about creating value for the organization, okay, we found that created some value, but what can we do differently to create more value?
To improve it.
Yeah, and this resonates with me with well-being and anxiety. So I think about, sorry, my sister comes up in the podcast a lot. I don't think she listens that often, but often the world in terms of her is often like, it's, you know, it's almost people, oh, that's all about me. If something's happened, like my mum was late to pick her up, that's her fault. That reflects on her as a person because it was personal to her. That's no, it was all about my mum. So actually, is the problem in about me, or is the problem out there? And so it's like the problem out there, that's a negative way of doing it. But actually, what we're talking about, creating value out there, as opposed to it being about me, is a safer way.
And suddenly, again, data then being data driven when you're at that end of the spectrum is releasing. Because it's creating opportunities, and it's creating new ways to look at how you can add value and how you can work differently with others. And, you know, another one of the thinking habits that we talk about is our thinking habit when it comes down to our professional risk. You know, when we're asked to either innovate or to risk, you know, at one end of the spectrum, it's very much a case of, okay, what's worked for me in the past? Therefore, in this new situation, I will take what's worked for me in the past and I will use it again, because my risk, that's how I minimize risk. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, it's more a sense of letting go rather than holding on. You know, what happens if I let go of what worked for me in the past? What else could I do? And again, data, however, where we are and how we think about risk, then will influence how we behave with the data that is around us. You know, the person who is into, actually, is this an opportunity to let go and explore, will be looking at the data, say, what other things could I do in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So choosing the right mindset, and then again, that's the open-minded. So rather than being, but you talked off air actually about it's being growth mindset rather than almost quite fixed mindset. So this is what's always worked for me in the past, and that's how I'm going to do it every time again. It's a bit fixed. It might be you miss out on a totally better way of doing things because the circumstances might have changed.
And you don't have to be in a big team and with an HR analytics expert in your organization to be thinking around data in this way. You know, you can be an individual working in a small organization, surrounded by people's stories, people's, the business dashboards. You know, you've got direct access to the business dashboards in those small organizations. You apply that with some of the science around improving people performance, combined with some of the data that's coming through around what type of tools and technologies might be able to, suddenly you're being released to say, actually, maybe there's something new, something different I can do to bring value back into the organization.
And actually, that's lovely place almost to wrap. So really what we're saying is this is all about, data is about how can you create or co-create value in an organization. Choosing that right mindset is key. Being curious. I mean, you sound so enthusiastic about it. And I think some people might think, oh, data, it's scary, it's numbers, it can be numbers, but it's also, evidence from other areas. You talked about it as being patterns. So your data, you say it's about patterns, not necessarily about, facts and figures and evidence there. So spotting patterns, listening. So we might get patterns through listening to people, through external data, it's almost looking at lots of different sources and seeing whether you're getting an overall theme. You talked about being careful about unhealthy traits, which is almost just being too dependent, being too fearful, and just have confidence maybe in these sort of things, and balancing the fact it doesn't have to be perfect. So our analogy about the restaurant, you take all the best data available at the time and put it together and make that choice. And that could mean that new data emerges in the future that shows that that's why it was wrong. But at the time, we made the best decision available to us. So we're kind of saying, go for it, right? We're going, don't be scared of data, go for it, is kind of what you're saying. Laura, how would we summarize this?
Yeah, data is your friend.
Data is your friend, absolutely. Data is your friend, and believe that, be friendly to it, and therefore it sets you free, maybe, because it's not about you being the expert, which means that you can then come down with it, actually relying on the data, and that's the best decision at the time, and therefore you can change the decision in future if the data tells us something different.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's opened up opportunities for me personally and professionally, and excitement for the industry, and it's challenged me. I wouldn't have grown without data in my life. I wouldn't have been challenged. My thinking wouldn't have been challenged. I wouldn't have been wanting to explore something new and something fresh if I hadn't been challenged by the data that was surrounded by me. So, sometimes it might be tough but that challenge is where we learn and where we grow and where we can kind of flourish.
Absolutely. So if people want to learn more from you and connect with you, Laura, how would they find you? You're fairly easy to find on LinkedIn, obviously.
LinkedIn and Twitter are the places where people typically can find me. It's at Laura Overton on both of those. I run a sporadic newsletter on LinkedIn called Learning Changemakers, where I'm really interested in our role as influencing change, regardless of the level we are in the organization. Explore some of those themes, and the work I do with Emerging Stronger, I will give the podcast the link to the site to you to put into your show notes as well. But again, you can find Emerging Stronger on LinkedIn as well. Do you want to just summarize what it is? So I'm doing work with Emerging Stronger, which is all about, it's a global initiative, it's a global project, which is looking at how, as people professionals, we can start to take smarter, bold action. And that's a kind of action that is kind of business first. It's open-minded in terms of not being siloed. We've been talking about, it's about L for leading and learning. So we're trying new things, but we're learning as a result of them. And it's D for being deliberate. So bold action is what we need in our industry at the moment, and Emerging Stronger is how we kind of are exploring that together. And we have a global masterclass, we do podcasts, writing, toolkits, all kinds of different things to support the industry at the moment. So definitely you can find us on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll put all the links there. Laura, it's an honor. It's so lovely to speak to you, and thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's been a really thoroughly enjoyed and hopefully a really informative podcast for people, inspire them to get their hands dirty with data and be confident about it.
Love the conversation. Thank you for having me.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now, you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.